Panthers were trying to get a deal done with the Browns for Baker Mayfield. What's the latest on that pursuit?
It's all about money, right? And listen, the Panthers are still very interested in Baker Mayfield. That hasn't changed. In talking with folks throughout that building, some were optimistic, some were cautiously optimistic. Someone else that I spoke to didn't think that the deal was going to get done, and obviously that person was correct, that the deal was not done. Look, Baker Mayfield is due $18.85 million in guaranteed salary by virtue of having his fifth-year option picked up by the Browns a couple of years ago. So what it means is no matter where Baker Mayfield is playing, or even if Baker Mayfield isn't playing, that he will be making nearly $19 million in the 2022 season. So when he gets traded from the Browns, and I don't think the Browns are going to just outright release him. I've never really felt that way unless things just get dire. When they do trade him, the Browns are going to take on some of that contract. They don't want the number public right now, but one can assume that they would pay about half of that salary, right? So we'll use round numbers here, and we'll say it's $9 or $10 million. Well, the Carolina Panthers are already picked up Sam Darnold's fifth-year option of $18.85 million. They don't want to pay two of them. In fact, they don't want to pay one and a half of them. And so David Tepper, the owner of the Carolina Panthers, has let it be known, listen, we're not picking up the other half of Baker's contract. We'll pick up some of it, maybe $3 million, maybe. But other than that, that's about as far as we are going to go. So who makes up that delta? Is it going to be the Cleveland Browns having to take even more of that salary and gifting the Carolina Panthers, a former number 1 overall pick who, when healthy, is a top half quarterback in the NFL? Or is it going to be Baker Mayfield saying, you know what, I do want my freedom out of Cleveland. I don't want them to just hang on to my rights while I just sit here when I know that I am a top-tier player in this league. I'm going to take a pay cut to make sure that I can get to Carolina and I can be the number 1 quarterback there and show the Cleveland Browns what they have missed out on, especially in Week 1 when the Panthers faced the Cleveland Browns. So far, neither side has blinked, or really any of the sides, right? The Carolina Panthers aren't willing to come up on their number. Baker Mayfield not willing to take a pay cut. The Cleveland Browns not willing to take on more of Baker's contract for what would probably be a day 3 pick at best. So we stand here today where we have been standing really since before the NFL draft, when these two teams were really dancing back in April. It has continued into May, continued into June. You'd have to think that the start of training camp is a deadline. The sort of mini camp was a soft deadline. The Panthers had a little bit of urgency trying to get Baker in there with the guys before everyone broke for summer. It just didn't work out that way. We'll continue to monitor it.
JJ, I mean, other teams have been mentioned. I mean, we've heard Seattle. BMAC last week, I think, said Minnesota, possibly. Is there a sneaky team that maybe could make a play for Baker Mayfield, or is it just Carolina at this point?
At this point, it's really just Carolina with the Seattle Seahawks as a distant 2. Here's the sort of issue with the Carolina Panthers is, the Cleveland Browns could hang on to them into training camp, even if they don't want to. And here's the other thing. The Cleveland Browns don't really want to because Baker has to still report. He has to physically report to training camp. They can't say, oh, we're going to excuse you, just stay away. Remember, like Deshaun Watson last year with the Houston Texans still had to show up to the building even though he was never going to be placed onto that practice field after the first couple days of training camp. And so that's a similar situation. Obviously, the circumstances are far different, but the Browns can't just tell Baker to stay home and we're going to excuse the absences. So Cleveland doesn't really want that, but if in the event that they do allow that to happen, that they add that sort of sideshow to the team as they go into training camp, they could hold on to Baker until another team has a quarterback who suffers an unfortunate injury that then needs a Baker Mayfield, who would then happily pay, let's say, half of Baker Mayfield's contract in order to bring him on. And so that's where a team could really emerge. But right now, Jeremy, it's really just the Carolina Panthers with the best offer for the Browns.
Okay, so if the Browns and the Panthers can come to a trade deal, BMAC, what does that mean for the future of Sam Darnold? We mentioned Brissett and Dobbs as the options in Cleveland. Could Darnold be part of a trade?
It depends on what happens with Baker. I feel like if the Carolina Panthers trade for Baker Mayfield, it's safe to say they probably will try to move Sam Darnold. And JJ just hit on some key points regarding that scenario. You already picked up the fifth-year option for Sam Darnold. So if you already have that locked and loaded and he's guaranteed that money, and you make a trade for Baker Mayfield, it's safe to say you're going to try to move him. But this is a very, very weird year for quarterbacks, because outside of Cleveland, the only other team that really needs some type of quarterback assistance is the Seattle Seahawks. And they seem to be okay, quote unquote, hearing what Pete Carroll has said with their quarterback situation currently for the Seahawks. So me personally, if Baker goes to Carolina, I think it's safe to say the Panthers will try to do everything in their power to move Sam Darnold.
B-Mac, I think that the Panthers would certainly be interested in moving Sam Darnold if they were able to get Baker Mayfield. But the Panthers, because they have $20-ish million in salary cap room, actually was just listening to their VP of Football Administration, Samir Suleiman, who was talking about the public that doesn't really know how much salary cap space they really have. But that's beside the point. They could hold on to Sam Darnold because they have the salary cap space to hold on to him. And then I was talking about that unfortunate quarterback injury that seemingly always happens every training camp. Well, if it doesn't happen in every training camp, it certainly will happen in the first couple weeks of the season. Well, you can hang on to that asset in Sam Darnold, the former number 3 overall pick, with his contract and deal him later on. So I don't think that the Panthers, I don't think there's really an appetite for Sam Darnold out there in the trade market right now, so much as you want to trade him. But if that appetite can be created through a series of unfortunate events over the next couple of months, Sam Darnold then becomes an asset that you can move. And because you have the cap space to still house him in his $18.85 million salary for this season, you can wait and see what happens around the league.
And if you're Matt Corral, and you're looking at this situation, you're just coming into Carolina thinking that you're going to get a shot at some point to play if Sam Darnold is the quarterback. But now, if they bring in Baker Mayfield, the future is not now. If you're Matt Corral, B-Mac, when you're sitting here looking at this situation, what are you thinking in terms of what your NFL future looks like?
You still got a shot. And we're talking when it comes to the future of Matt Corral, but it still could be the here and now because both guys have been inconsistent, Sam Darnold and Baker Mayfield. Both guys are in these conversations because they haven't been able to do what they were supposed to do. They haven't lived up to the expectations. So if you're Matt Corral, you shouldn't be threatened by either guy. Sam Darnold, if he is still there at the quarterback position, or if they trade for Baker Mayfield. Both guys have been inconsistent, and I think it's safe to say, JJ, with your Carolina ties, one would say Matt Corral has a higher ceiling than both Sam Darnold and Baker Mayfield currently.
I can't necessarily disagree with you. Certainly looking at what Matt Corral was able to do last season in that offense when healthy, I think for Matt Corral, and listening to head coach Matt Rule talk about it, I think it was last week, he just has to focus on himself right now and just learn how to be a pro and learn how to operate in a professional offense. And that's going to come. I don't think that Matt Corral was drafted and anyone in Carolina thought that he was going to be a legitimate starting option in the first 2 months of the season. If he is, then something has really gone wrong with this team. They still have P.J. Walker on the team as well. This year is going to be about learning for him because, again, we're talking about all these big numbers, right? Nearly $19 million in guaranteed salary with Sam Darnold and with Baker Mayfield. There is nothing is keeping Sam Darnold in Carolina past this season. When Baker Mayfield is traded to the Carolina Panthers, if and when that happens, nothing's keeping Baker Mayfield there beyond this season. So Baker can play himself into a contract extension, and he can be the guy of the future for the Carolina Panthers. But what happens when that does not happen? And Matt Corral really doesn't have any power over that. So right now, as a third-round rookie, it's all about him just becoming the best quarterback, the best pro quarterback, learning from these guys in front of him, because there is a very, very real scenario where these Carolina Panthers, who have struggled to figure out the quarterback position ever since Cam Newton's arm started falling off the last several years, they've been trying to figure out this quarterback position, and they may not get it figured out this year either. And there you have Matt Corral sitting there waiting to take over in 23.
Yeah, no pressure on Matt Corral, just learn the system this year. Lead NFL insider Jonathan Jones and two-time Super Bowl champion Bryant McFadden, the latest news and insight into the Browns and the Panthers' possible quarterback situations as we are 79 days away from the start of the 2022 season. For more from BMAC, be sure to check out his podcast, All Things Covered with Patrick Peterson. The latest episode features Devin Lloyd of the Jaguars discussing teaming up with #1 overall pick Travon Walker this coming season and what the Jags' hopes are for 2022. Download and follow the All Things Covered podcast wherever you get your podcast audio. You can also watch on YouTube.
Do you want a sports network that delivers everything that matters about the game? The highlights, the picks, the instant analysis, no yelling, no fake debates, no politics. Hit the subscribe button and never miss a moment.